Okay, everybody, let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us for this special Earth Day session of EI Live K-12 for students and educators. My name is Cassie, and I'm really honored to be hosting such a great panel of speakers today to talk about all the different types of food that scientists eat while they're doing field work in sort of faraway places. We've gotten a lot of questions about what do scientists eat when they travel to faraway places like Antarctica or Greenland, or if they have to be on ships all the time. So we thought that we would do a special session for Earth Day, and we have four very, very wonderful scientists here today, all from Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory, which is the largest research center that is part of the Earth Institute. They're going to go ahead and share each of their own stories and different places they've been, different sort of do-it-yourself DIY food experiments they've probably had to run with limited resources, how they conserve everything that they have to eat given that there are limited resources, and the importance of conserving food and water, especially when you don't have direct access to them via a grocery store. So for those of you who are joining us for these sessions for the first time, just to give you a little bit of information about the Earth Institute, which I had mentioned that Lamont-Doherty is part of. The Earth Institute's core mission is to foster a greater understanding of the science behind climate change and sustainability. And what we're hoping to do with these sessions is to really introduce you to all the interdisciplinary work that our scientists do. And we have weekly sessions of these up until the end of June. And we actually, two of our speakers today will be doing sessions in the near future, and one of them has done many in the past. So if you do have any questions about those future sessions, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. We've made them so that they are for different grade levels and appropriate for different grade level students and educators, as well as parents. So we'll go through. I just want to quickly introduce the four individuals that we have here today. So we have Vicki Ferrini, Jonny Kingslake, Mike Kaplan, and Kirsty Tinto, and all of them, as I mentioned, work at Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory, which is located in Palisades, New York. Many of the scientists that work at Lamont have to travel for field work, and in the past year, this has, of course, looked very different. But they're going to be sharing stories today about exotic places they have been. And the type of food that they've had to eat while on these adventures. So we're going to be utilizing the Q&A box today. So at any point, if you have a question, feel free to type it in. We'll be sure to also open it up to questions at the end of the session. But if you do have things that come up that you're just so excited and can't wait to ask, feel free to type it into the Q&A box. So we're going to start with Vicki Ferrini, and then she'll share her slides, and then we will move on from there. So Vicki, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Is that working right? Awesome. All right, so hi everyone. Great to be with you today. I am a marine geophysicist, and I go to sea on big ships to collect all kinds of data about the seafloor. I specialize in mapping the seafloor. What you see in this slide is a picture of one of the ships that we use in the US academic community when we go to sea to collect data for all kinds of different things. There's currently a cruise out there, which on this Roger Revelle, which is operated by Scripps Institution of Oceanography out in California. On this cruise right now is the ROV Jason, which you can see in the bottom right picture, which is a robot on a wire that goes down to the bottom of the ocean and collects samples and video and all kinds of data, brings it back up to the surface. When you're on a ship like this and you're at sea, for example, where the ship is now at the East Pacific Rise, you're many, many days away from land. And basically everyone on board is that's the only people on board. This ship can carry up to 58 people total, so 21 crew members that make the ship work, and 37 scientists. The ship can be at sea for as long as 60 days, which is limited by provisions, largely food, and 52 days if it goes at 12 knots. So if it's traveling at a pretty good speed. So basically the food and everything that we have out there is all we have to work with while we're at sea. Occasionally, fish will be caught over the side and that feeds into meals, but generally everything that we have when we leave port is what we have. So this is a picture of how the food is stored on board, some of it. So there's dry stores, cold stores, all kinds of different food managed and packaged in a way to make it last as long as it can. Just to give you a sense of what it is like out there, this is a video that I took on a different ship. Basically, when we were, I was in the galley, so I was going for my meal and the water was splashing up against the windows. And to give you another sense of what it looks like on a ship and how much it moves around, you'll see my soda can here just falls right off the table all by itself. So, oops. So the cooks that are making the food for us, which is definitely a highlight of our daily patterns and what's going on out there, they have to deal with this moving ship all the time. So there's special things in the kitchen, in the galley, to help them make sure that the food doesn't fly around and the pots and pans don't fall off the stove. So they do a great job to keep spirits up and really to make us have some luxury and some feeling of home. One of the interesting things at sea is lettuce. So at the beginning of the trip, you start with the soft lettuce, the soft leaves, like a mesclun mix. You move on to harder lettuce like romaine and iceberg. And toward the end of the trip, if you get that far with your fresh produce, you end up with cabbage in your salads. So they manage things really well to make sure that you have fresh food as long as possible and to make sure that nothing goes to waste. Just to give you a couple of examples of what it's like cooking out there, these are from this current cruise. So they're wearing masks because of COVID, which is really good that they're being careful out there as well. They cook both inside the galley and out on the deck. They can grill things for us, which is really exciting and a treat. Every meal, there's a menu posted and there's always all kinds of choices for you. And there's a buffet and you can have pretty much as much food as you'd like to have. There's also food available 24 hours a day. If you're hungry and want a snack, you can make a sandwich or find popcorn or other snacky foods. So generally the food out there is kind of what you'd have back at home, maybe sometimes a little better. It's nice that they're cooking for you. There's always dessert, there's always snacks, there's a variety. They sometimes will, if there's a lot of rice from one meal, they'll fold it into the dish of a next meal, again, to make sure nothing goes to waste. In terms of water, many of the ships have the facilities to take the salt out of water to make fresh water for the ship. So that's one thing. And another thing that we do that's a sustainable practice is we keep all the trash and we either incinerate it if it piles up too much, or if it's organics that will decompose, some of that goes over the side. The last thing I wanted to point out is that when you're at sea on a ship like this with really nowhere to go for a long time, and you're being fed all this important food or all this great food, it's important to try to exercise. And so we don't walk too much on the ships. You maybe go up and down a few flights of stairs, but there's a lot of exercise equipment on board. So you can actually do some exercise and burn off some of those calories. So that's all I have, and I will pass it back to Cassie.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vicki. So the one question did come in. So if you do want to take a look at that one. So Jonny Kingslake, you are up next.
Okay, hi everyone. One second while I share my screen, and thanks so much for being interested in our science and what we get up to in the field. So like Cassie said, I've done some field work in some of the cold places on the planet, and Antarctica is one of the more exciting ones I've done. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So here's Antarctica down on the bottom of the planet, and I spent 2 winters, our winters, but their summers there, driving around on the surface of the ice on snow machines. So these are these big motorbike-like things with tracks on the bottom which transport you around and drag all your equipment around with you. And not just your equipment, of course, all your supplies, and that includes fuel, for your snow machines, and of course food, which is what we're talking about today. So I'm going to talk about some of that food. But first, this is where we were living in this tent, this pyramid tent. It's about 2 meters or 7 feet by 7 feet. And there was 2 of us living in there, and we lived in there for 2 months on both the trips. So it's quite cramped, and it's also, you don't have any space to walk around or, inside. So it's all very focused in your living space is very much focused in this tent. What you'll see is there are these boxes weighing down the edges of the tent. And that's where we keep all our supplies, like food. And so you might think straight away, well, that's just staying outside in the background weather of Antarctica. And yeah, that's exactly right. The food and all your equipment actually has to be totally fine with reaching minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 30, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and staying like that for months. Because, well, even the stuff we keep in the tent gets down very, very cold at night. So this is when you approach the tent a little bit, and you've opened up the front, and what you'll see is these boxes, and this is one of our food boxes. And then on the left-hand side, you have another food box. On the right-hand side, you have a box with some electronics and some radio equipment in. But this is one of our food boxes. And then looking into the tent, in this picture on the bottom right, you have one of the guys I was with, this guy, Scott, posing for the photo. And there's a couple of boxes running down the middle of the tent there, and that's where we keep all our cooking equipment and food. And I don't have the exact right picture to show you the layout, but I'll try to describe it. You have this is the same setup. You have the box with some food and equipment in here, and then you have a stove, a very old-fashioned paraffin stove in the center of the tent with a pot bubbling away on top of it. And then you have this old-fashioned looking lantern at the top as well, bringing warmth and light into the tent. And the amazing thing is that this is really the same kind of setup which people have been using for decades in Antarctica, or more than many decades, because with a few tweaks, this equipment is the same kind of stuff we've been using for decades, because they essentially perfected it early on, and this has worked ever since. So what were we eating? So as I said, everything needs to survive being very, very cold, and it also has to be quite lightweight because we're dragging it around everywhere. The one thing you can get a lot of is water, because everywhere you walk, there's snow underneath your feet. So you just need to scoop up some of that snow, making sure it's in a nice clean patch, which you haven't been walking on. Scoop up that snow and put it in a pot and melt it, and then you get free, ultra pure drinking water. So we got water. So what we do is we use dried food like these. For example, this isn't the same type we use, but this is the same type you might have seen if you've been backpacking or camping. This is what you can buy in a store in the US. It's basically a little pouch of dried food, which you pour water in, and the food absorbs all the water, and well, that water was warm, so that you end up with a nice warm pouch of spaghetti. And the tip is, if you have the time, is to leave it soaking for a whole day and then reheat it later on. Because if you pour the water straight in and try and eat it within the 5 minutes, which they say it should rehydrate, that's not true. You should leave it all day and it properly rehydrates, and it makes it much more tasty. So we had about 5 different types of this food, and we cycled through them for 2 months. And so every 5 days you're like, oh, I'm back to whatever it was, back to spaghetti. And you think, and it might not be your favorite one. And then you might look forward to the other one, but it's always on a cycle of 5 days. So it gets quite repetitive. And if you don't like some of the flavors, it can be kind of, yeah, it's not the best. So that's what we're eating for main meals and the dinner in the evenings. But there were some special occasions too. And so we did bring some stuff to make some special food when we felt like we deserved a treat. So I'll address the middle photo first. This is a photo of me looking very, very tired after a long day of doing some research outside the tent. And this is me coming back into the tent and eating what it's essentially like a tinned chocolate cake with lots of syrup and sauce all over it. So it's really, really high sugar content, really high calorie content to like give you a boost at the end of the day on a special occasion. And then on the top left, we've got pizzas being made, or kind of some versions of pizzas made with this particular type of cheese, which doesn't mind being frozen for long periods. And it really wasn't very good cheese. For example, if you heat it up, it doesn't melt, it just gets hot. So it was a bit questionable that it was actually proper cheese, but still we tried to make pizzas out of it. And on the right hand side, we've got the same guy making some pancakes, and they were really tasty. So then this was our real special occasion, was on Christmas Day. And on that day, we actually had frozen turkey breasts. And that's what this guy's frying in a little frying pan, which we bought especially for this on Christmas Day. We've even got some brie and some cheese and some hot sauce here to try and make things more tasty. And just to finish off, so every science talk, every talk from the Earth Institute should have an equation in it. And this is my special recipe in the form of an equation. So if anyone has ever heard of this stuff called condensed milk, so actually I hadn't heard of it before I went to Antarctica, but it's like a thick version of milk. It's really sugary. The sugar content of it's really, really high. And what we did when we wanted a treat is we went outside, got some fluffy snow, mixed in a bunch of this condensed milk. We had a couple of tins of condensed milk. And what it made was something really similar to McDonald's ice cream. So that's my top tip for a recipe for Antarctic fieldwork, is make sure you bring some of this tin condensed milk. That's everything I've got. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonny. So we always keep condensed milk in the pantry at home because it's actually really great in coffee. And I think some of our viewers are probably too young to be drinking coffee, but your parents might enjoy the pro tip of using condensed milk in coffee. So Jonny, there's a few questions that came up during your presentation. If you want to take a look, you can also choose to answer some of those live later. So thank you again. And next up, we have Kirsty Tinto.
Hello. Sorry, I just eagerly said that I was ready and then had to find all my buttons.
All good.
So I'm following on from Jonny quite appropriately because I work in polar regions as well, but doing a very different kinds of trips and undertakings. So do you see my whole screen there?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So I work on big projects that sometimes involve aircraft or sometimes involve just big teams of people. And when I say big, I mean like a dozen, all moving somewhere together to make measurements of the seafloor as well. A lot of the time I'll be based out of one of the year-round inhabited bases in Antarctica. And this is one of them. This is Mcmurdo Station in some pretty unpleasant weather, actually. But we've spent a lot of time based out of here. The blue building over to the left is the one that has the galley in it. And when you're at a big station, you're so well cared for. This is a picture inside the galley, and there's a whole population of professional cooks who are tending to you. So it's kind of like what Vicki was talking about on the ship, because you eat really well when you are on station. But you're not always on station, and I have two things to show or stories to tell of different sorts of work that I've been involved in that has started from the big station and then headed out. So in the first one, this is the edge of the station here, and you're looking out at the Transantarctic Mountains in the distance, and in between it's sea ice all the way across. And we had a camp, and you can see the tents here, that was based on the sea ice. Now, in terms of eating food, being in quite a big team in Antarctica is fantastic because, number one, you get to hire a cook. So the woman who's pulling this sled was our camp cook for this expedition. And number two, the entire continent is a freezer. And so unlike the dehydrated food that you have to carry if you're moving everything just in a very small team, we were able to eat frozen food, which is way more delicious than dehydrated food. And the frozen food could just sit around in cardboard boxes outside. And Lucy, the cook, would go shopping each day and just pick out what she needed from the cardboard boxes and bring it into the kitchen. The only trick is that you need to have a refrigerator somewhere if there's anything that you don't want frozen. So if you've got a bottle of milk, you're going to need to keep it in the fridge so that you don't end up with a bottle of frozen milk. So food's really good in a camp like this. I like this picture because it shows this dome-shaped tent that we had as our science working area. And we use these for different projects. So I'm showing from a slightly different project what they look like on the inside. But the important thing with these is over on the right, you can see that there's a stove with a chimney that's kind of built into the structure. And sitting on top of the stove, there's always a metal pot of water that's just sort of quietly steaming away. In part, that adds a little bit of humidity to the atmosphere inside the tent, because Antarctica is incredibly dry because everything's frozen. And in part, it's melting water for us to drink. Now, it's true that Antarctica is basically covered in frozen water, but when you're on a sea ice camp, that water isn't actually all that nice. Sea ice is the frozen ocean water that's frozen on the top, and in the corners, in between ice grains, you get little pockets of salt. So you do not want to drink salty water for any length of time. And so instead, we had to go and look for icebergs. This picture here is showing you sea ice in the flat, and then all the little bright higher things with shadows are icebergs that have come off the continental ice sheet. So those are fresh. So you've got big lumps of fresh water surrounded by a flat floor of salty water. And that it's basically, you can go quarrying for freshwater ice that you can turn into fresh water to drink. And the way you go quarrying in an iceberg, and this is a picture taken from somebody else, but it's with a chainsaw. And so the same way you might have seen, or it is done, that people carve sculptures out of ice with a chainsaw, it's possible to just carve blocks of ice from an iceberg so that you can get fresh water. And the trick to it is that the oil that you use for the chain has to be food safe. So you use food grade oil instead of machine oil, so that you can get your water. You'd be dragging a sled behind a skidoo as you went up to your quarry, and you'd fill it with blocks of fresh ice and then drive back to the camp and do that back and forth as many times as you need, like going to get water from the well. You just go to get water from the quarry. I wanted to show you one other thing as well. It's important to think about where fresh water comes from all around the world and everywhere. But just as another contribution to food we eat in the field, I wanted to have one story of deprivation. And some of the other work that we often do uses airplanes that are based on the ice. So this is a plane that's driving on floating ice in Antarctica. And we do work inside those planes, and it's pretty close in here. There's not a lot of space. The kitchen facilities are usually a coffee maker and a microwave. And so when you don't have a professional chef to take care of your every need, this is a terrible picture, but I think it's appropriate to the topic, you end up eating a lot of microwave food. This is like a just add water noodle pot. And we spend a lot of time eating really terrible food in the air, and get very glad to come home to the stations where we're well looked after. It is Earth Day, and we've been thinking about places where we don't have infinite resources and need to take care of things. And so I had a bit of wisdom to share, controversially. Best before dates in Antarctica, you can't take them too seriously. A lot of food gets shipped down there and stays there for years. So best before doesn't always mean that you can't eat it after. And it's a way that works in Antarctica, and it's a way that works in the real world, that we should all do a good job of cutting down on our food waste. And that's what I had to show you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to remember, is that, you know, when we don't necessarily have access to a lot of resources, we're way more likely not to waste those resources. And, you know, when we go to the grocery store, you know, I tend to overbuy and stock the pantry full of things, and then things expire, and then we think it's no longer good, and then we can really all do, I think, a better job, especially for me personally, of less food waste. So I think that's a great message. Thank you. Jonny, do you want to come back on and share your quick story about Antarctica, and then we'll have Mike present? So Jonny wanted to point out one more thing about his experiences in Antarctica.
No, it's just that Kirsty's story about how the whole continent is a freezer really reminded me of a problem that we had, that when we were moving around so much, every camp we would bury our special food, which we'd saving for a special occasion, like that picture you saw of somebody cooking some chicken breast or turkey breast on Christmas Day. We had a whole stack of bacon that we were saving for a special occasion, and we buried it every time we stopped, buried it in the snow because it keeps it nice and cold. And then one day we drove off, and about 4 hours later, the guy I was with, the other person in the field, said to me, "Oh no, I think we left the bacon. I think we left it back at camp." And then we had to think, should we drive back 4 hours and then 4 hours back again to get the bacon, or should we just leave it? And unfortunately, we just had to leave it. So all of our special treat bacon was left there in the ice sheet. And the next year I came back and tried to find it, but there's nothing there to distinguish any place from another place. So we were going around trying to find this bacon, which had been buried, by getting a pole and probing down into the snow, trying to find it. Unfortunately, we never found it, and it is still there. So in thousands of years' time, because the ice is flowing, the cool thing about the ice is that it actually flows like a fluid, like a syrup, which is flowing out towards the ocean. That bacon is moving along with the ice, and one day it will be deposited in the ocean. And I feel bad about littering to this day, and also felt bad at the time because we didn't get to eat that bacon.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I am glad you shared that story. But and if you do want to learn a little bit more about how ice actually flows like a fluid, Jonny has done a couple of EI Live K-12 sessions for us in the past, and those videos are all available along with resources on the Earth Institute website. So thank you, Jonny. And so Kirsty and Jonny, I see a few questions in the Q&A box. Again, if you want to tackle those, feel free, you could type some answers there, or we can wait until the open Q&A period. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A box. Okay, and last but not least, Mike. So we have Mike Kaplan, and he's going to share his fieldwork food experiences in a different part of the world.
Well, welcome, and thank you for listening to me talk. There'll be a little bit of overlap with the others, actually. So I'm Mike, as Cassie mentioned, and I'm on the last slide. And I studied how glaciers have changed in the past, similar to Jonny and Kirsty, but I'm more of we say we're past or paleo people, how glaciers and climate and landscapes change in the past. And so I've been to a few different places that may not have glaciers today, but in the past they had glaciers or large ice sheets. I also work in Antarctica, and I'll show that also. So I thought that the things I have eaten in the field have really depended, I think, on two things. One is how we get to the field, and so that means how much we can carry, and where the field work is, which has come up already, how hot it is or how cold it is. So I start off with just backpacking with me and two colleagues. This was in Colorado, and it was just whatever. We had to hike up to the high mountains in Colorado. So the first thing is it's pretty warm, so we couldn't take anything that was perishable. We were up there for about a week. And then the second thing is we had to bring stuff that's pretty light, because we had to bring our tents and our sleeping bags. So it was just the three of us. And so whatever the three of us could carry going up. And then we have to, this has already been asked, but we don't leave anything behind. So whatever we don't eat or recycle, we bring out. Although bringing the food up is always more weight than bringing out. So here, this is in Rocky Mountains, where we just backpacking in with backpacks. We're really just simple food, rice and spaghetti and beans, and just this little stove that we use. That's a younger me for the other panelists on here. this was 1999. I am trying to move. So then the next picture shows moving up from just backpacking and what we could put on our backs to having horses or brewers. These are like mules, or kind of related to donkeys. And obviously, if we can have a mule or a horse carry some of our food, we have a lot more we can take. We still can be limited by the climate. In the upper left, this was in Argentina. We had a big snowstorm, so it was cold enough to bring some meat and cheese. In the upper right this was in the high Andes. We were hiking up to about 16,000 feet. And it's in the subtropics. So we couldn't bring anything that was, so in this case, we could bring a lot of stuff. It's amazing how much the horses and the mules can carry, but we couldn't bring anything that was going to go bad. I also had a trip in Costa Rica, which, as you know, is in Central America. It's in the tropics. And that whole season was just basically tortillas and tortas and peanut butter. And that was backpacking. So one, it was very hot. And so we couldn't have anything that was going to go bad. So we had a lot of just basic foods, and we were backpacking. This is in Argentina, where we had a range of, we had horses, so we could bring a lot. Sometimes we were able to cook inside. In the lower left, that's me and a colleague, Mateo, where we had dinner in adobe huts, so we could set up a nice little kitchen. But other times, here's also Mateo and I at about 15,000 feet, and it was very cold at night. And we only had a tiny little stove that we could use in front of the vestibule. It's sort of the way you see people cooking and when they go up to high mountains. So then moving up to helicopters, this is Antarctica and the Antarctic Peninsula. And this is, I went to the Antarctic Peninsula with some Argentine colleagues. And in a helicopter, especially the larger helicopters, you can put a lot of stuff in them, including all your tents and your food. So in this case, we even brought a little stove. In the lower right, you can see our little stove. And you've already been introduced to pizza making in Antarctica. This is our creative ways of making pizza in our little stove. And same thing that Jonny and Kirsty pointed out, the stoves are great because they really warm up the tent. So while you're cooking, you don't need all these big jackets. You can see we're just wearing kind of heavy sweaters or fleece jackets at night. So this is our pizza. We all have pizza photos from Antarctica. When the weather is bad, or you, as Jonny said, you just want to give yourself a treat and you have time. And then this is moving up to not just helicopters, but snowmobiles and small planes. Kirsty showed one of the bigger planes. A lot of times we fly on these little planes. They're called Twin Otters. And you could see this is all the stuff that we were able to cram into the plane, which is quite a bit. They're limited, but then also sometimes you have a lot of people. So it adds up to a lot of food. And then in the lower left is, like I already mentioned, we also have these snowmobiles and we hook up the sleds, and we can bring quite a bit of food in some of these areas. In the upper right, this photo was taken about 180 miles from the South Pole. We were very close to the South Pole, and it got very cold. It would get -30, -40 at night, and during the day, not much warmer. And the big thing, which was already mentioned, was everything freezes, and even water bottles. If you're not in your tent with a stove on, water will freeze, and you have to learn where to put the water bottles inside your jacket, kind of close to your body, and things like this. Everything just freezes very quickly when it's that cold. So this is the other kind of extreme where we have a place that's really cold. And of course, that means we can also have ice cream. So Antarctica is one of the few places where you can bring big, giant buckets of ice cream. So that's a picture of me finding the ice cream for the whole camp. I didn't eat the whole bucket, at least not all at once. And I have one more. And this is the other mode of transportation. We use different sized boats. And boats are similar to the small planes. We can really carry a lot of stuff, but we also sometimes have big field teams. So the space quickly gets used up. But this is in Argentina, also near Chile. And we had really good meals here because somebody asked about fishing. We were able to fish. This is a lake, so we were able to catch fish sometimes in the lake. And we also were able to bring food with us. It was cold enough that we could bring steaks and chicken and other meats. So this is various pictures of us. In Argentina, it's very common to have what's called the asado. We have a big meal at the end of the field season where we have a big grilling, sort of a barbecue, what we'd call barbecue or grilling in the US, and sort of a big fiesta at the end. So the last thing I was going to mention is, I guess our recipe, the one recipe I could share when I was working up in the Arctic, that's on the other side, closer to the North Pole, we would always bring these giant bags of flour because at that time we'd be worried we would get stuck for weeks before somebody could come and get us if the weather was bad, and we needed kind of survival food, not survival that we had to worry, but stuff we could live on for days and days if the weather was bad and they had trouble picking us up. So we'd bring these 20, 30-pound bags of flour because flour is pretty versatile. You could make a lot of things with it, bread and cake. And it was my birthday. And so my field team made me a big, giant birthday cake just made out of the flour. So that worked for that season. All right, well, thanks.
Thank you, Mike. I suspect that some of the professional bakers on the Food Network might have something to say about a cake that's purely made out of flour. So I just want to say a quick thank you to all our panelists. So right now, if you could all turn on your cameras again, we have a couple of questions that are remaining, that are still left unanswered. I believe there is, so let's start with the one where Jonny would like to answer the question live, but besides fish at sea, were you able to live off of the land? And I think that's a really great question.
Well, yeah, I was actually I was going to say that in our case, we weren't doing that at all. In fact, you're not allowed to hunt or fish in Antarctica, and especially where we were, just because it's against the international treaties. But I was going to sounded like other people had more chance to live off the land than we did in Antarctica. I didn't want to type that and dismiss it too quickly.
I can tell a tale that turned out really well for me. I was in Greenland once with those sort of dehydrated rations because we had to carry them everywhere. And it gets old eating those after a while, and we didn't want to see them anymore. But they are really light. They're really handy for carrying around. And we came back to town, and I believe it was the policeman in the town really had his eye on them because they're super convenient for going hiking, and he wanted to bring them on his hiking trips. So we were able to do a trade. He had some fresh crab that he'd pulled out of the fjord, and we had some nasty dehydrated food that we never wanted to see again. And he could pull crab out of the fjord any day he wanted to. So we did a very happy exchange. Everybody felt that they'd won because he got something that would have been hard for him to buy, and we got something that would have been hard for us to catch, and everybody got to eat something different that day.
Perfect. I like the trade and the bargaining. Yeah. Great. So I think we have one question left here. And I think this is a great way to kind of wrap up the session with, which is, what is everyone's favorite place to travel and eat? I'm going to assume that that is not necessarily fieldwork related. So maybe just to learn a little bit more about our scientists, you've all shared, your fieldwork food experiences. So why don't you let us know what's your favorite place to travel and eat outside of fieldwork? Vicki, why don't we start with you, and then we can go in the order that you all presented.
So my instinct is to say everywhere. But some of the best food that I've had while traveling for work, but not at sea, was in Malaysia. It was really excellent.
Excellent. Awesome. And Jonny, what about you?
Yeah, I went to Peru last 2019 with with work in some ways, but it was a field trip with some students, and we had amazing food, and it was an amazing place. I'd love to go back there as a tourist.
Awesome. And Kirsty?
Well, we're at Lamont, so we live in New York City. And it's an amazing place to go for food. And I just have to say that if you work with Cassie, she knows where all of the food is. And so my favorite places to eat are places that Cassie has told me to eat in New York City.
Well, thank you. I try. All right. And Mike. Oh, Mike, you're muted.
Sorry. I agree. New York City is great. I lived away for 20 years. I grew up around here and then I came back after 20 years, and I just have forgotten how many great restaurants we do have around here. I was going to say, I really like the food in South America, in Chile and Argentina. I just love the food, and I do a lot of eating when I'm there. The thing with field work, as we all mentioned, it's you can't always bring great food with you in field work because yet your options are limited. But certainly when I get back to town and other places on vacation, I don't really have a favorite like the others. I like a lot of places, but I always like the food in Italy. In southern Italy, was going for vacation in southern Italy was one of my favorites when I lived in Europe for a few years.
Awesome.
But New York City has great food. I agree.
Sure does. All right. Well, I want us to just wrap up and say thank you again to our panelists. I know this isn't your typical scientific talk, and you probably covered a lot of great things today. A lot of great questions from our viewers. If you do have any additional questions that you have, feel free to send them to me. I'm happy to pass them on. And I just want to end on a positive note here on Earth Day about some of the important points that many of you have brought up, which is to really think about conservation and where our food comes from, what happens if we don't have access to that food. And I think it's just really important to be aware of that. We're all very lucky to be able to access, clean water mostly and safely, and to go to the grocery store and get food. And when you're out in the field, that becomes much more challenging. So thank you to our viewers, and please let us know if you have any additional questions, and we hope to see you for a future EI Live K-12 sessions. Thank you to our panelists. Thanks for your time, and have a great rest of the afternoon or evening, wherever you are.